Hello again, I'm John Sargent, back with my weekly chat for Saga's Not Going Out Club. Good communications are a lifeline for journalists. I'm able to reach you today through the power of the internet, millions of bits of electronic data sent effortlessly in a matter of minutes. Throughout my long career with the BBC, this would have seemed like science fiction, or in a word, magic. But being in touch with such efficiency can sometimes be a drawback, and it certainly alters the relationship between you and your bosses at home. When Evelyn Waugh in the 1930s covered the Abyssinian crisis in Ethiopia, telegrams were his lifeline. As described in his novel Scoop, still the best and most amusing guidebook to my trade, messages had to be simple, and they were often simply wrong. Every journalist in the field longed for a herogram, relaying back extravagant praise from the editor. Exclusive news was the prize, beating other journalists to an important development. But woe betide the reporter who got it wrong. A Daily Express editor sent a herogram to one of his staff only to follow it up 2 days later with the terse comment, "Your story still exclusive. Why?" In my early reporting days, communications were often appalling. When I was sent to cover the Vietnam War in 1972, we sent messages by telex to London and had a weekly radio circuit. I was there following the major American withdrawal, and there were warnings of a communist victory. The BBC mattered because of the World Service in English and medium wave broadcasts in Vietnamese. For a short time, I was the only BBC correspondent in Saigon, the chef de bureau no less. It made me an object of suspicion. In a newspaper cartoon, a BBC correspondent was depicted with $1 in his mouth, implying we were in the pay of the Americans. I was determined to report the truth. But it's often said, truth is the first casualty of war. And in our present situation, with the world in the grip of a fearful pandemic, a similar danger arises for journalists today. How can you manage to balance the voracious demands of a public hungry for news with the far less exciting business of sticking to what you know to be true? Throughout is the constant pressure on governments, ever anxious to keep the public on side, and now as then, the need for people to be aware of the insidious effects of propaganda and fake news. Our difficulties in Saigon would not surprise my political correspondent successors at Westminster. How can you be sure of what's going on when the government control so much vital information? Ministers asked to give detailed accounts of the provision of safety equipment or the availability of tests have often given answers that are inadequate, if not downright evasive. In Saigon, we would go to daily Vietnamese briefings known as the 4 o'clock follies. When I was there, we were concerned about whether the communists had captured the northern provincial capital of Quang Tri. A freelance friend working for the Daily Mail was becoming increasingly frustrated by the lack of hard news. One evening, after a few beers, he solemnly announced, "I have taken Quang Tri." I shook my head in disbelief. "But what are the BBC doing?" he demanded. "Well," I replied firmly, "we're still fighting in the suburbs." The next day, the Daily Mail's man in Saigon waved a telex in front of my face. "It was the page lead. Got a herogram." "How far did you go?" I asked. "Oh, you know, champagne, girls kissing the soldiers on the tanks, communist flag fluttering on the citadel." I was shocked, and the next day relieved, We were then formally told that the communists had been repulsed. It was a crucial turning point, and I could soon go home. There would be 3 more years before the end of the Vietnam War. My friend sent a confusing follow-up report to the Daily Mail. He didn't mind at all when he was informed it wasn't published. The editor could have complained, "Your story's still exclusive." But he didn't. He seemed to have forgotten all about it. We had a few beers to celebrate. As I've said, communications then were nothing like as efficient as they are today. Now, anyone who is interested can watch the daily briefings and note when those involved decline to reveal what is really going on. It can seem like information overload, with hours and hours of television devoted to this story. I can't forget the lesson of my days in Saigon. The coronavirus pandemic is one of the greatest disasters in history. But the news coverage is often, frankly, rather dull, particularly if the journalists stick to reporting only what they know. Until next time, cheerio.